everybody, and welcome to the Mandorla Art Award Forum for Theme Development. My name is Mike, and I will be your MC for this afternoon. Before we get underway this afternoon, today we acknowledge the traditional custodians of this country, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation. We acknowledge their elders, past, present, and emerging, and respect their care of this land over thousands of years. Well, to get underway this afternoon, I'd like to introduce Angela McCarthy, who is the chair of the Mandorla Art Committee. Thanks, Angela.
Thank you very much. I'm going to be the school teacher, school mum person here. The pronunciation is mandorla. It comes from the Italian word for almond, and the almond shape is often found in Christian art as a background to Jesus and a background to Mary. So it's mandorla. I've been trying to train this lot for a while. So don't let me hear you say mandorla. Okay, mandorla. If I could roll my R's, I'd do it, but I'm not Italian. So I'll just do it the Aussie way. But welcome and thank you very much for coming. The Mandorla Art Award had its first exhibition in 1985. The prize for the early exhibitions was a trip to Umbria, Italy, to spend some months in a studio there. Sounds like a really, really nice idea. I think I'd like to do that right now. And in that time, the origins of it are a group of people in the northern suburbs, then the northern suburbs, now the inner suburbs, who were very concerned. They called themselves the Mandorla Centre for Inner Peace. They were very concerned about the increasing secularisation of society and how that would leave behind the real value of having things that were reflective, things that engaged in our ancient texts and in ancient ways. They didn't only run an art exhibition, they were also a group who regularly gathered for meditation. So the Mandorla Centre for Inner Peace became something very special. And from there has grown this exhibition. It was originally annually, it's now every 2 years, but of course we had one this year. It was meant to be last year, but COVID messed that up. So our next one, of course, is planned for next year. What the Mandorla Art Award would like to do for you as artists is to be able to provide a beautiful venue. This is our venue for our next exhibition, to provide professional curatorial services. So we have a very professional curator in Lyn Di Ciero, and also to provide for you a venue where your works can be exhibited and for sale. And we work hard at bringing that about. What Mandorla asks of you is that the ancient texts that belong to both Christian and Jewish heritage, that those ancient texts be interpreted in a new way, interpreted in a contemporary way. And our new theme of Metamorphosis, which revolves around the quote from Isaiah 43, and our biblical specialist is on his way. He is going to be here and he is going to talk about that ancient text. So we're talking about a text that's around 3,000 years old, and yet it speaks to us of things that happen today. So he's going to break that open for us. So what we ask of you is that you provide us with a new interpretation, a new visual way in which we can engage in this ancient text, this thing that has been part of humankind, this need for change. How do we do it? What does metamorphosis mean? In the Greek word is metanoia. And how do we engage with that? So I welcome you as chair of the Mandorla Art Award Committee and look forward to the interaction of today.
Thanks, Angela. That's great. We'll move along. I'd like to introduce Sylvia Grevel right to my right. Thanks, Sylvia.
Welcome, everyone. I'm going to read what I've written down because then I can stick to the 10 minutes. Once I get talking, then it's hard to stop me. The Mandorla Art Award is explicit Christian, as Angela said, but what it means to be Christian, that's an ongoing cultural and personal process of transformation, and that's what we're talking about in this year's theme, transformation. So I will be talking about the interconnectedness of metamorphosis. That means finding new ways and forms, and the connectedness of metamorphosis with metanoia, that is a personal change of heart. How do the both connect, and what is crying out in our lives and world to be transformed? What is sacred to us? And what do we need to move into a new horizon? So it's about a movement within the reality of our lives here and now in the postmodern societies. And this Mandorla Art Award is also a plea with artists, with your way of a re-enchantment of the world around us. So it's about radical change, the conservation of tradition, but also to change tradition here now for us. And I was supposed to be talking after David Cohen, and he was going to explain how urgent the calling of the prophet is, but he will do that later, hopefully. But it's a calling for truth. It's a calling to us to define what is sacred to us, what needs to be connected or reconnected, the etymological meaning of the word religion. So to define what is sacred to us, to each one of you, we need to get deep into and in the complicated web of threads weaving the private and the public, the individual and the social, traditions and renewal. And from a religious or more specific point of view from Christianity, we are called to be fully present in our life, in our day-to-day being alive, in our situations, right here, right now. And to relate to the questions, the quests, the insecurities, the threats and the fears. And this is from the conviction that God has made a covenant with creation, and God is become human, the incarnation. God has become flesh in Christ. Now, religion, and that often puts artists off, can be seen as a set of dogmatic truths and as an institution, but you can also look upon religion as poetry, as stories, and that's important for us here. Religion is also a process of imagination. With its symbols and stories, it gives life and our surroundings a specific view and focus. It's not about dogmatic truth, but it's about images, rituals, and stories that are there to transform the lives of the people who have committed themselves to the different and the diverse traditions. Now we go to metanoia, change of heart. Metanoia is used to define a transformative change of hearts, and especially spiritual conversion. For all of us, at some point in our lives, there are moments when we are called to authentic personhood. Conversion or metanoia can be understood as a kind of movement into a new horizon. And it comes from awareness, a knowing from within that has the potential to emerge. And that's what we are hoping for in this award. And so that what emerges can change us. It comes out of the old, and it may set one's life on a different course towards something new. This change of heart means a change in how we experience ourselves in the world, and indeed the world itself. For the real work of conversion is a gradual turning away from our self-interest and allow space for the unexpected reality. And for this award, it's important to emphasize the unexpected reality of God. This process is a form of rebirth, and in Christian terms, a resurrection. It's continuous and it's even deepening. The encounter awakens something in the depth of our being. something that we did not know was there. It's a process, and that's important. That is not one of ascent, but of descent, and it involves going into the darkness of our being and to see the light. So the Christian message, if you really cut it down to a few words, it's that God loves the world. And it's about love of the world. And it's about the uncovering of an unreality. Things that make us dead inside, that kills our planet, that does wrong. And it's about coming to fullness of life, and not just for ourselves, but for everyone. Because central are the community, it's about creation, and it's about peace more than anything. My last part of the talk is about art, because that's why we're here. Visual art is about whatever we see. A face, a candlestick, the way a building sits in the landscape. And they engage the artist both as fact and enigma. Now the question is how to transform the sights and apprehensions and emotions that are our common experience into poetic truth. Here we go again, poetic truth. An artist can have sort of a double vision. Attention to the subject and attention to the material you create your art with. So you go on an imaginative adventure and you reconcile two forms of attention. So content is shaping form, and form is reimagining content. And that all happens within ourselves and in connection with the world around us today, day to day. And the specific thing that artists can do, and that's why we have this award, is that artists can work with this sense of urgency of the prophet, but a freestanding urgency. So you can create from your vision. And I wish you all the inspiration that comes with that.
Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
What about we put our hands together for Sylvia? Thank you, Sylvia.
And we will.
The good news, you had 30 seconds to go, but we might steal that 30 seconds. A very good afternoon and welcome to David Cohen. Thanks for joining us, David. We'll get you to speak shortly. We'll wait till we get you all mic'd up. So take a breath and we'll get you set up with a lapel mic so you've got a bit of time to settle there. So before we get to David, we're going to move on, and it's my pleasure to introduce Britt Mikkelsen, winning with Mandorla. Did I get that right, Angela? Mandorla. Yes, yes. Thank you, Britt.
Thank you. First thing I really wanted to say about my experience of entering the competition or the award was I'm not what you would call overtly Christian. I was brought up in a Lutheran household, but I'm not practicing. And I think a lot of people find the idea of this being a religious art prize can be a bit daunting. But I think what you need to remember is that there are key terms and key universal ideas that the board and the committee put together that are really universal and of the time. And that's what I found with the theme last year. So don't be disheartened if you're not overly Christian. But saying that, I think it's really important to connect when you enter an art award, especially one that's themed. Otherwise, I don't think there's an integrity in the work, if you like. So last year the theme was Micah chapter 6 verse 8, which says, "Act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with God." So what I did with that passage was pull out three terms: justly, mercy, and humbly. At the time that the invitation to enter was out, there were a lot of homeless people in my area, and it affected me greatly. I remember being in Sydney, this is a little while before that, And it was the first time I actually sat down with somebody who was homeless and had a chat. And she was a 16-year-old girl. Her name was Gail. And, you know, it was a horrible, typical domestic violence story, ran away from home. But what struck me at the end of the conversation was that she thanked me because she goes days without someone seeing her and talking to her. And I think that's the thing about homelessness. It makes us feel uncomfortable. It makes us question our own humility. It makes us question our own goodness. When do we have the energy to engage? When do we not have the energy? And these sort of juxtapositions were what I was interested in. So I knew I wanted to do sort of an ode to homelessness and have that speak about us being just and fair and humble in our own lives in order to connect with all people, no matter what their situation was. So the work, for anyone who hasn't seen it, is basically a blanketed figure. There's no figure inside, it's just a light. And I wanted that to represent that invisible person, but inside every soul is a person who shines as brightly as you or me or anyone else. They just happen to have been in a really bad situation. And I knew I wanted it to be a tattered kind of blanket. And I got a vintage blanket and I draped it and it was resined. But instead of just tattering it, I looked into the numbers of homeless people, and there's, this was the last census, there's about 8,200 people who actually sleep rough every day in Australia. It's probably much, much higher now. So there was exactly 8,200 holes cut in the blanket, so the light shone through. It's light for every one of those people. So that's, I guess, how I approach the artwork. I guess there is some religious connotation with the shrouded kind of figure. Was that something I thought about intensely? No, but you know, as I was draping it became very obvious that there was also those sort of undertones. So yeah, that was my work. I was really proud of it. I think sometimes the simple ideas work the best, and I think that was kind of an example of that. So as far as entering, my advice, first of all, would be photography. My work, if I hadn't got a professional photographer, probably wouldn't have got shortlisted, in all likelihood, because it's very, very, very hard to photograph well. So, you know, if you're capable and it's just a painting or whatever, that might be okay, but that was the best money I spent there, absolutely, because that's what they see. They see the picture, you know, and you can wax lyrical, and, you know, I think the words have to be really thought-provoking and evocative, but it's the picture they see at the end of the day. And the other thing is just finish. I mean, one of my considerations, because it was lit internally, and this is obviously not going to apply to everybody, but it could be a different consideration, is that do I have a cord sticking out of this figure? And my decision was that would have completely ruined the piece. So I spent a lot of money on a battery system, in the knowledge that if I was lucky enough to win, which I was, which is fantastic, that I would probably have to hardwire it, which I also did. But that decision, I think, was important, you know, and it's about those little things sometimes that I think make the difference. Yeah, I think that's about it, unless you want me to talk more.
That's great. Look, that's really good insight. Thanks, Britt, for sharing. Would you please put your hands together for Britt? That was really good. Well done. Thank you for that. Much appreciated. And if you are joining us via our Facebook page, good afternoon and welcome. It's nice that you can be with us this afternoon. We're going to move along and hear Breaking Open the Biblical Theme with David Cohen. Good afternoon and welcome, David. Nice that you can join us. Thank you. Over to you.
Thanks very much. My apologies for being a bit late this afternoon, but it's great to be here. And I want to thank Angela particularly for inviting me to come and share a little bit of, or a few thoughts around the biblical themes that emerge out of this verse and this passage that surrounds it. And I guess I want to preface my comments by saying that one of the things I find interesting about the biblical text is that even if you're not a part of the Judeo-Christian tradition by faith profession, the biblical text talks about universal themes, I think, that really transcend culture, transcend time, transcend ethnicity, transcend all of those things that we perhaps sometimes see as separating us. And I think this is one of those examples in Isaiah 43:19. I want to approach my thoughts from a rather oblique angle, if I can. In your mind's eye, I'd invite you to imagine a gathering of people alongside a river in a land that is far away from their own land. They're not tourists, they're not visitors, they are exiles. They have been violently carried off from their own land to a place that is totally unfamiliar to them. Why did this happen? Well, the prophets, Isaiah being one of them, had been telling the people for quite a long time that they needed to change, but they were not choosing to change. They were not taking that path. And even though they were given that chance time and time again, they didn't change themselves. It's part of a much bigger story. If you like, it's a story of anti-metamorphosis. It's a story of a people who could have changed, but chose not to change. A people who were challenged to change, who would not change, or in plain language, they were just stubborn, stuck in their ways. So back to the riverside. What are they doing alongside this riverside? Well, it's interesting because they're singing. They're singing a song, but it's not a song of joy, it's a song of sadness. It's not a song of one person, it's actually a song of the community. It's actually a psalm. And it's been preserved in our Bibles. You can read it in Psalm 137. By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down and there we wept. For those of you who are old enough, you've probably got the Boney M tune going through your mind as I speak. Well, can I say to you that on a more serious note, the Boney M version really doesn't reflect the pathos and the sentiment of that psalm and that moment. There's one particularly striking line in that psalm, and it's when the people sing this: "How could we sing the Lord's song while in a foreign land?" It's ironic because they're singing a song about how they can't sing a song, but that's another story for another time. Clearly, those people were trapped in hopelessness and despair. They saw no way forward for them to return to their land, and they seemed to actually be wondering who they actually were, what their sense of identity was. They were, if you like, in a liminal space. They were kind of between where they were and where they were getting to, or what they were becoming. Back in the good old days, they knew who they were. They thought they knew how they should live. They believed they were God's people. They felt assured of God's protection, irrespective of how they behaved. And now, all of that had been thrown into confusion. They were no longer sure of who they were or how they should live. And in fact, it doesn't matter much to their captors because all they were interested in was conscripting a few more slaves. These people could be described as stuck, I think. Being stuck in life is not a bad place to be, as long as you're aware that you're stuck. And I think these people were aware that they were stuck. They were sitting by the rivers of Babylon, and they find themselves in a place of danger, but also a place of opportunity. The face of danger is conforming to their captors' violence and oppression and succumbing to hopelessness and despair. If they take that path, they risk losing their identity as a people and their desire to live good lives, which is what the prophets were telling them to do all along. On the other hand, they could radically change their thinking. Their metamorphosis as a people is theirs to grasp, should they choose to grasp it. Should they have the courage to do so. For sure, it wouldn't be easy to reimagine themselves as a people under oppressive activity or captivity, but it was not impossible. But there's more to the story than this, because as we turn to Isaiah 43:19, the theme of this year's Mandorla Art Award, this transports us to many years later, but it's the same group of people that we're talking about. This was probably written at a time when these exiled people fortuitously had been released from captivity. It sounds amazing, but that's actually what happened under the Persian king, the Persian Emperor Cyrus. he allowed the people to go back to their land in freedom. It's a different vision in Isaiah. It's not one of hopelessness and despair, it's one of optimism and anticipation. Isaiah 43:19 is also part of a song, like Psalm 137, but it's actually a much longer song. The song in Isaiah actually stretches from Isaiah chapter 40 to Isaiah chapter 44. It's actually 4 chapters long, and they're long chapters as well, so it's a very long song. These words are part of that song. And the tone of the whole song, from Isaiah 40 to 44, is completely different. Like I said, it's optimistic, it's anticipatory of what could be for this people. If you get the chance to read the whole song, particularly if you're looking at interpreting this verse through the Art Award, it would be great to see the context, I think, of where that verse sits. Not only is this song different in tone, but it's actually voiced differently as well, if I can put it that way. What do I mean by that? Well, by the waters of Babylon, by the rivers of Babylon, the song was sung by the people. But here in Isaiah 43, this is a song sung by the prophet to the people. So they're listening to this song that is being sung. And as the prophet sings, he sings to these people about their potential or perhaps imminent metamorphosis into a different kind of people. What's interesting here in Isaiah is that their metamorphosis is not theirs alone to grasp or to create. The I here suggests that true metamorphosis is not solely self-generated. It actually involves someone or something intrinsic to the thing or the people being changed. They alone cannot change themselves unless they are acted upon by something extrinsic to themselves. And so we have these wonderful words, I am about to do a new thing. Now it springs forth, do you not perceive it? For the prophet, the I was Yahweh, the God of Israel. The God that these people felt had abandoned them was the very God who would actually change them into something different, make metamorphosis possible. Perhaps the people themselves could initiate their metamorphosis, but it was God for them who would complete that change. Metamorphosis in this case is a collaborative effort. So as I think about the various expressions of art and the concept of metamorphosis alongside this verse in Isaiah 43, I imagine a few things. I imagine that metamorphosis is not individual here, it's actually the change of a whole community. A little bit like what we were talking before of the theme last year of Micah 6. It's not about just individual change, it's actually a change in our attitude as a community, whether it's be to homelessness or any of the other challenges that we face. It's a transforming of the collective, not just the individual. This is a group of people changing from one thing into another. I also see in Isaiah a community that was willing to grasp the challenge to change. Change themselves, but also to be changed by something outside of themselves. It's what I would call a both and rather than an either or. Rather paradoxically, these people who return from exile are the same people who were taken into exile. But they're a different people because they've been changed through the experience. They're the same in substance, but different in identity. Sure, some of them died in exile, but their progeny, their children and their children's children carry their identity with them. So the metamorphosis somehow retains the old, but the old becomes new, which I find quite interesting. The final question remains in the words of Isaiah 43:19. Now it springs forth, do you not perceive it? Don't you love questions? They kind of force you to think, don't they, really? And when I read those words, I'm thinking, am I missing something here? Is there something I'm not perceiving here? Perhaps metamorphosis can happen, but not necessarily be perceived. These words suggest that the process of metamorphosis is not actually complete unless it is perceived by those who are being changed. I wonder if people of Isaiah's day could see their own metamorphosis, or was it to those around them who perceived them? Did they see the change in those people? For me, my artistic expression when I'm not teaching theology and doing those other things is music. I'm a musician. And one of the ways that I see metamorphosis happening in music is when a composer or arranger, usually a composer, takes sounds and silence and arranges them in a fresh, new way. But I'm also reminded as a musician that I don't control the sounds and silence completely. There are parameters within which I have to use those. Or to use another metaphor, I was reading an article a number of years ago by a potter who was talking about working with clay. And his comment was really interesting because he said, while he's trying to change the clay into, in this case, a piece of pottery, he needs to recognise the inherent intrinsic qualities of the clay that allow him to do certain things, but do not allow him to do certain things as well. And so as I thought about this theme and as I thought about my interest in music and as I thought about that image of pottery, the potter and the clay, it just brought to mind that idea that metamorphosis is both an action by the person or the community or the object being changed, but it's also the action of some extrinsic force. In the case of the people of Israel, it was God's self. In the case of us, in the case of you as an artist, it is what you do with the artistic materials that you work with. But in any case, in all cases, it's one working with the other. So there were some thoughts that I came up with and I must say it was really challenging to think about the biblical text. And being a musician, as you know, Angela, being a musician sort of helped me to think about it in a musical realm. But I'll be really fascinated to see what you as artists create. I've loved the previous years of the Mandorla Art Award. It'll be great to see what you come up with in this theme of metamorphosis. Thank you.
Well done. Would you please put your hands together for David Cohen? Thank you, David. That was really good. Thank you for unpacking that so well and so clearly. We're all going to drive home today singing Boney M, The Rivers of Babylon. Thank you for that memory of that great song. It's going to be ringing in our heads for a couple of days.
Right.
Thank you so much, Dave. That was great. We're going to move into a time of Q&A shortly, but before we do that, I'd like to introduce Lyn Di Ciero, who's the curator of the Mandorla Art Committee, with some really important news. Lyn, is that right, I believe?
Well, yes, yeah,
Thanks,
lots of news. And firstly, obviously you know that the exhibition is going to be here, so it will be from the 21st of May to the 10th of June next year. And the prize money is the same as it has been previously, $25,000 non-acquisitive. And the rest of the prizes are non-acquisitive, so there's two at $5,000. There's the Patricia Tui Painting Prize at $5,000 and a $2,000 People's Choice Award. So after the exhibition is shown here, some of the works will tour to New Norcia for a few weeks, only a small amount because the gallery space there is quite small. Those works will return to Perth, then the whole exhibition will then be seen again at St John of God Hospital. We're not sure which one yet, but it will be shown at one of the hospitals, the entire show again for a month. And then a few works will go to St Mary's Cathedral for a few weeks as well. So the works will be seen for quite a while, after the show. It's not just those several weeks that, it's actually here. And during that time, the works will be available for sale. So what we trialled this year was selling the works with QR codes on the labels, and that worked really well. It meant that we did get sales when the work was touring. People just loved the idea of using a QR code because we're all used to it now. So that worked really well this year, so that's definitely going to be used next year. So, as I said, works will be still for sale while they're on tour after the exhibition. Okay, so to enter, it's online only on our website. The cost is $50 and limited to one per person. 2D works no larger than 150 by 150 centimetres. 3D no larger than 120 centimetres in any direction. Video works are only 4 minutes long. So it's really important that you stick to those rules because if on your entry form you've put a size higher, for instance, it won't get to the selection committee, it'll be dismissed straight away. So you need to stick by those rules. And so when you actually come to deliver your work, if your work happens to be a little bit over that, I then have to tell the judges because you haven't adhered to the conditions. So it's really important. And those dimensions, mind you, the 2D is with a frame. And you can't, I've had questions, can you square this dimension? No, you can't. That's the dimensions, 150 by 150. And there's no change in any way to those dimensions. Okay, so in the entry form you'll be asked for 2 to 4 images of your work with sizes up to 5 megabytes, an artist statement and a biography. And these will be used in the catalogue and they will be edited and proofread, and you will see that after they have been edited and proofread. So photographic quality, as Britt was saying earlier, is of the ultimate. If you really want your work to get in, you want the selection panel to see what your work is. So it's really important that you take the time to either get somebody else to do it or learn how to do it yourself. There's a lot of places now who are offering photographic workshops for artists, and if there's not one near you, can ask your local community centre or whatever if they could put something on like that, because it's always popular with artists. So one image has to be the entire work, a close-up of the work, and for artists submitting screen-based works, just a still from the artwork. So for the selection panel, the artwork must clearly demonstrate the theme, be your original work, of course, not infringe on copyright, be executed within the 12 months prior to entry's closing, which is 18th of March next year, and must not have been previously exhibited. So 5 p.m. Western Standard Time, 18th of March next year, is when it closes. There'll be no extensions, so don't expect that sometimes I know some art awards do, there won't be any. Artwork delivery, or artists are notified by the 8th of April if they've been selected or not, and artwork is delivered on the 17th of May. Now, a selection panel next year, is Ted Snell, Honorary Professor at Cohen University, Curtin University Associate Professor Susanna Castleton, who's also an artist, and our theologian is Glenn Morrison. On the judging panel is Chris Malcolm, Director of John Curtin Gallery, and Erin Coates, artist, and now with the City of Perth in public art, and the theologian is Ross Fairless. So through both those processes, they'll consider the visual impact of your work, your technical skills and your application of media, and also, as I mentioned earlier, the compliance to the terms of the Art Award. So, and the new thing, of course, that Mike was talking about earlier is that we've now put together a theme retreat. So after this, if you want to really delve deeply, want to delve some more into the theme, there's a theme retreat which is 1 day and 1 night at New Norcia. And we've got all sorts of workshops, really interesting workshops planned. Committee members, some of them which are here, both Angela and Sylvia will be taking workshops. And so it'll be really, really interesting. Flyers are on the desk behind you, as are catalogues, previous catalogues for sale at $5. So pick up a flyer on your way out. There's only 26 people will be booked for that retreat. So, and it's only $160, which is amazing because that's the workshops, your accommodation and meals, all meals included. So I think it'll be really good. So with all the information that you've heard today, I'm expecting some really great things.
Thank you, Lyn. Would you please show your appreciation to Lyn? Thanks, Lyn. Well, we're going to move into a time of Q&A now. So can I encourage you, don't be shy. And if you could keep your question fairly, rather than a comment, if you could maybe ask a clear, concise question, that would be great to any of the panel. So I'm going to say first up with our hand, and we'll race over and you can kick off our Q&A. We've only got about 10 to 15 minutes, so don't be shy, don't hold back. But if you could just introduce yourself, maybe your first name would be fantastic. So your first name, and then ask a question to any of our panel, David, Angela, Sylvia, Britt or Lyn. So who's first? Who wants to? Yep, there we go. Okay. Just your first name would be great.
Camilla. And it's a question for Lyn.
Yep.
Lyn, is this an acquisitive first prize?
Yes.
Or non-acquisitive?
Acquisitive first prize.
It is acquisitive?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then
Heard
there is non-acquisitive prizes as well. So the major prize of $25,000 is acquisitive. So the work becomes the property of the Mandorla Centre of Inner Peace. It is then kept in perpetuity at New Norcia Museum and Art Gallery, and that's where it's loaned and lives and it is on show from then on.
Great. And introduce yourself.
Nick, Lyn, palette knife work, how dry has the painting got to be?
Very dry. Please have it finished. Don't bring it in wet.
That was an easy one. Thanks, Nick. Okay, here we go. We've got another question over here. Thank you.
Liliana, a question for Britt. Where did you get your battery pack?
The 12-volt shop. It was big. It's
Very heavy.
In fact, it took the sculpture up to 48 kilos, and the maximum was.
Wow.
So, and I was just lucky that at the time I didn't think it was going to be that big, and I went, "Oh, am I going to go over?" And weighed everything, went no, just there. But yeah, it was very, very heavy, and yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Thanks to Liana. Who's next? Who would like to ask a question? Here's your opportunity. Well, we've got the panel here right in front of you. Here's your chance to ask a question. We've got a bit of time, so don't be shy. Come on, who's next? There we go. I knew someone was waiting to put their hand up. Maybe start thinking about a question while we get to this question, hey? What do you reckon? Here we go.
Hi, my name's Shana. I just wanted to check, you mentioned screens and video. Is there facilities to display video work?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Did you see the show this year?
I missed it.
You missed it. Okay. Well, it'll be, as you see, screen-based works in this exhibition here at Holmes Court Gallery in West Perth today. There is small screens with screen-based works in the show, but what we do is actually try to give you the maximum space with the screen-based work. So the actual screen is 1.5 wide. So you're still getting the maximum amount of space. It's not going to be a small screen. And we also, in this gallery, we have a screen space to my left, to your right, but that is only one space for a video. But we can show them anywhere here, and certainly we'll give everyone the maximum space.
Here we go. Thanks, Shana. Great question. Who's next? Did I see it? Were you just adjusting your hair? Or did you, or did you have a? Do you have a? You don't have a question, okay? It's almost a bit like an auction, isn't it? You've got to be a little bit careful. If you put your hand up, it's a bid, right? There we go. There we go. I'll race down here now. Here we go.
Hi, my name's Laura. That's my name. It's good if you can remember what your name is. Yeah, hey. I'm just inquiring, apart from Isaiah and Metamorphosis, where else in the Bible would you say has been profound in regards to metamorphosis?
Resurrection. But if metamorphosis is very deeply related to the idea of resurrection. One of our previous exhibitions was resurrection. It was probably the most successful in the number of submissions that we had to it, because it engages with that whole idea of, yes, I can change, and the change that we come to can be of such importance that we don't go back, that it becomes a major move in our lives, in our community, in everything else. So in the New Testament, of course, resurrection is one of them. But there are several other references as well that particularly in the letters, that would be really relevant as well. And you're welcome to move into those kinds of ideas if you have that capacity.
Thanks, Laura, and thanks, Angela. That was great. Yep.
Yeah.
We've got to continue on. Yeah.
Yeah, I also mentioned the word metanoia, which is the transformation of your heart. But of course, in relation to what David said, the idea is that there's something that's bigger than us, so the transcendent inspires us to change our hearts. So it's a real It's not just a change of form, but it's a change of being. Yeah. We're peeking through the photographer.
That's great.
So metanoia and conversion, those are
Other terms.
chunks of it too. Yeah, other terms.
David?
David, did you have any you want to add to that?
Just adding a couple of things to that. I think I agree with what everyone said. I think, in fact, I was reading something just recently that was talking about, rather than speaking of us being human beings, speaking of us as being human becomings. There's that sense in which, you know, as individuals and communities, we're always changing from one thing to another. The question is, what are we changing from and what are we changing to? And, you know, Angela's right. It's embedded through the New Testament, primarily in that image of resurrection. I think in the Hebrew Bible, which is kind of the area where I spend most of my life, it's characterised in a turning around, which is actually the Hebrew component. It's the comparative word to metanoia from the Greek in the New Testament. So change of heart, change of mind. But in the Hebrew sense, it's actually you're walking in one direction and then you turn around and walk in a totally different direction. But again, the principle is there's that internal desire for metamorphosis, but in biblical terms at least, there's also that extrinsic force, if that's not too strong a word to use, but there's that extrinsic influence or force which causes or enables the individual or the community to turn around. So, yeah, but I think that idea of becoming, to me, it's embedded right through the biblical text from Genesis to Revelation. It just manifests in different ways, different images. Yeah.
That's so good. Thanks, David and Angela and Sylvia. Another question down the front here.
Hi, my name is Britt. Previously, you've used a biblical verse, and this year it's a concept or a term. Interested in why made that change?
We have changed over time with different ones. Like, for instance, one of our previous awards was called Incarnation, and then there were other verses. When we had the one, I think it was 2014, or 2016 was Resurrection, there are 60 verses. So we oscillate backwards and forwards. So this time, considering what COVID's done to the entire human race, we were very engaged in that idea of there's major change happening, we can sense it, we can feel it. Where does that anchor in our sacred text? And came up with the Isaiah one, and certainly there will be other texts. So.
Even the award goes through Metamorphosis.
Yeah, the award goes through Metamorphosis, that's right.
Of course, there are quite a few commentaries on the website.
Yeah, on our website there are some commentaries that you would be interested in reading. Some of them are heavily theological, others are not. So, because it comes from all those different sources.
That's good. Thanks, Angela. And thanks, Bridget, for your question. We've still got time for a couple more. So if you've been pondering asking that question...
Is there anything come through on Facebook? Any questions arrived on Facebook?
Have we got access to... Good afternoon. If you're still joining us on Facebook, by the way, welcome. We haven't forgotten you. It's nice that you can join us. All right, we've still got a few more minutes, so we're not rushed. We've got a bit of time. I know there's one. I know you're waiting to put your hand up. I know there is.
I have a question then.
Sylvia, would you like to ask a question? There we go.
I was wondering if there's any images already coming up, rising, bubbling. Yes, I see yes.
They're keeping them secret though, see?
Yeah.
I can see that. They're not going to share anybody.
They're not?
No.
Wow.
It's their secret.
I think we've got another question from Nick. You got two questions. You're doing well. Just one more.
Yes, that's right. When I think of COVID, I think of all negatives. Okay, it's not really affecting us over here, but the rest of the world, COVID is a negative sense of change. I would be interested in hearing the panels. Can you see positive change?
I certainly can see positive change.
I'd like to hear.
Well, one of the most outstanding positive changes that I saw last year, the thing that moved me so deeply, was in Italy, with all those people banging pots and pans and singing. And major artists from Scala Scala Opera in Milan, standing on their veranda, singing their hearts out. They couldn't perform, they couldn't go to Scala, their world was shut down, but they stood on the veranda and they let it rip. And how beautiful was that? It stopped being something I only do when I'm paid to being, I will share my voice because we're in this together. So I just see there's enormous changes, and from this state of individualism where if it's got to work for you as an individual, it's only the individual that counts. We've been gradually being pulled into all of that. Even in education, we've been pulled into the idea that it's the individual output and the individual result that's more important. It's not education. That's another story. But now we're looking at each other and talking community. And we're talking about, I'm going to get vaccinated because that's really good for everybody. Or I'm not going to get vaccinated, whatever the role is. But we're thinking more about other, about community, rather than just by ourselves. And I think that's a major leap forward. And I think that needs to be celebrated.
That's great, Angela. Sylvia, you've got some thoughts on it as well?
Yeah, I think what is really important, you're just nailing the major question. So from our traditional texts, there are stories from people with God. And the Hebrew text and the Greek text, and it's a story of love. It's a story of love. And the real metamorphosis, or the metanoia, is to be transformed into a being that loves, that accepts that it's loved. It loves and it looks at the world with the eyes of love. That is the radical transformation.
Same with climate change too. So that's another, it's not just around COVID ideas, but climate change is something that has really impacted us so much that the naysayers can't ignore it any longer. This has to be considered as an extraordinary thing that's happening in our world today. The ozone hole this spring is bigger than it's ever been before. That's hanging down, that's over the size of Antarctica. These sorts of things that are happening in our climate are major. That's an imposition that's happened through all sorts of actions. And now, how do we change that? And how do you as artists offer us an image, a dream, a vision of how we can change this? How can we engage with those ideas and change, have a metamorphosis?
That's great, Angela. We've got one, this will be our final question actually. I was just going to say we've got time for one more question. And here we go. Thank you.
Yes, to Angela and the panel. Could we see ourselves then as co-creators of a new world, a new creation in ways? And this is our metamorphosis as artists.
Yes.
How do you how do we all become co-creators of something that's really new?
Yeah, I mean, my comment on that, in fact, I've written a chapter in a book on this a number of years ago. And I think if you look deeply at the creation texts in Genesis 1 and 2, it's very evident to me that that's the role that we have as human beings. We're part of the community of creation, so we're not separate from the rest of creation. We're not necessarily even preeminent over the rest of creation, but that's not necessarily our role. But we are part of that community, and in being that, we're co-creators with God. We've been invited into that process. So, any artistic venture is on the cutting edge of creativity because you're taking something that was there and you're creating something new. As a musician, I'm taking sound and silence. I'm creating something new. As a potter, you're taking clay. As a painter, you're taking, but whatever medium you're using. And I think, if we lose the artists and the poets and the musicians, we've lost our humanity. We've lost our ability to be the creators that we were created to be. I think absolutely. Yeah.
And I think Britt had a really important word in your talk, authenticity. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really important. I mean, I think when I was early in my practice, when I'd enter competitions or awards, I'd often kind of pressure myself to do so. I think unless it really gels in your soul, I think it shows. you know, and I think this theme will definitely bring that out in everybody because it's so significant to where we are.
So good. Thanks, Britt. Well, perfect timing. We are out of time for the moment, but can I ask, would you please put your hands together for our amazing panel? David, Angela, Sylvia, Britt, and also Lyn. Thank you so much. We could have... I think we've got to keep going for a few hours the way we're going at the moment, but we do need to stop there. If you have been joining us live on Facebook, we thank you for joining us this afternoon. I hope it's been really beneficial for us being at Facebook Live this afternoon. So thank you for being with us. If you've been watching, good afternoon.
And thank you to Mike for being a wonderful
Thanks,
MC.
Angela. We're going to continue. So that really is only part of the afternoon. We're going to continue with some afternoon tea right now. But if you had a question, you didn't put your hand up, you're too shy, that's okay. You can mingle afterwards. And we're all hanging around for a little while, so you can hang around and have a chat to the panel this afternoon. So thank you for coming along this afternoon. Thank you for making the time this afternoon and coming out and being part of it. Nothing like being in the room. It's great Facebook Live, which is fantastic with technology, but nothing like being in the room and being and asking questions. So thank you for coming along this afternoon. That concludes the formalities. Have a great afternoon. Thank you.